Welcome to this explainer. Right now, we are witnessing what is arguably one of the most massive, sweeping disruptions in the entire history of the global automotive industry. And of course, I'm talking about the electric vehicle revolution. Whenever we look at a truly disruptive technology, something that is basically destined to completely overtake whatever came before it, there's almost always a very specific tipping point. It's that exact moment in time when its path to total market dominance goes from a maybe to an absolute certainty. But getting to that tipping point, well, it's not just about making cooler, faster cars. It is actually a massive, multi-layered logistical puzzle, and the missing piece might really surprise you. So let's just dive right into this.
Let me start off by asking you a very direct question. Is your next car going to be electric? Now, if you just instantly answered no in your head, hey, you are completely validated. According to research surveys, the average consumer right now is still pretty hesitant to make that leap. And honestly, this perfectly demonstrates that the technology, as revolutionary as it is, just hasn't reached that mass market tipping point quite yet. Consumers just aren't completely ready. There's this lingering perception out there that EVs are way too expensive, they don't have enough range, and they are incredibly slow to charge. But we have to ask ourselves, how true are those perceptions today?
To figure out exactly when mass adoption is actually going to happen, researchers have managed to pinpoint the exact magic numbers required to trigger that tipping point. Basically, mass market consumers are demanding a price tag right around $36,000, and they need about 291 miles of driving range to really feel comfortable ditching gas. Now here's where it gets interesting. The base models of some of the best-selling electric vehicles in the world right now, think the Tesla Model 3 or the Chevy Volt EV, are essentially already hitting or hovering right around these exact targets. And cost and range are completely fundamentally linked here because the battery is the single largest cost of an EV. So if the base models are already closing in on these magic numbers, the cost of the car itself isn't actually what's holding the mass market back anymore.
In fact, cost is rapidly becoming a total non-issue. Just look at the massive drop in the price of the battery. Again, the vehicle's most expensive component. It shows you exactly why. Back in 2013, the average price per kilowatt-hour of an EV battery was a completely staggering $668. At that price, just a basic Tesla Model 3 battery pack alone would cost over $22,000. That's literally two-thirds of the entire vehicle's retail price. But today, it has absolutely plummeted to just $137 per kilowatt-hour, bringing that total battery cost down to around $8,500. And industry projections are expecting it to hit an incredible $100 very soon. So we can absolutely, definitively bust the myth right now that EV production is just too inherently expensive. But if it's not the price tag and it's not the range, what exactly is the bottleneck?
Well, the answer really comes down to this number right here, 31. This is the missing magic number. 31 minutes is exactly how fast the mass market demands an electric vehicle be able to charge from completely empty to completely full. Think about it. If an EV cannot match the relative everyday convenience of quickly filling up at your local gas station, the average consumer simply isn't going to buy it, period. And when we actually see how current cars stack up against that 31-minute demand, the results are pretty incredibly revealing. And that target time of 31 minutes, the upgraded Chevy Volt EV, it only reaches a 39% charge. The Nissan Leaf gets to about 62%, and even the base model Tesla Model 3, using the absolute fastest, most ideal superchargers available, only reaches an 83% charge. And keep in mind, that is in absolutely perfect conditions. If you're in cold weather, charging gets even slower. So the absolute crucial point here is this. While automakers have successfully conquered the price and the range targets, they are still falling woefully short on charging speeds. The absolute largest barrier to the EV tipping point right now is, without a doubt, the charging problem.
Okay, so let's get into the technical pivot. Why exactly is fast charging so incredibly hard to pull off?
Why can't we just plug these cars into a standard wall outlet and get a 5-minute fill-up? Well, the root of the problem actually lies in a fundamental technical mismatch. Our modern power grids operate on alternating current, or AC power, but EV batteries, they fundamentally require direct current, or DC power to charge. You simply cannot charge a battery using AC power directly. It's impossible. So this creates a massive technical bottleneck, because literally every single ounce of electricity pulled from the grid has to be actively converted before it can be stored inside the vehicle.
Now that conversion is done by a device called a power inverter. When you charge a small device, like your smartphone, the little power brick you plug into the wall is essentially an AC to DC inverter, outputting a tiny 5 watts. Now, a Tesla Model 3 battery is obviously thousands of times larger than your phone. Cars do have small onboard inverters, usually around 7.7 kilowatts, that let you plug into a standard wall outlet in your garage overnight. but doing it that way takes up to 10 hours. If you want to compete with a gas station and charge in a matter of minutes, you need an absolutely massive, incredibly powerful inverter. And since you obviously can't fit a machine the size of a large commercial refrigerator inside the actual car, you have to offboard that inversion process entirely to massive external machines.
And offboarding that kind of immense electrical power is shockingly expensive. Industry experts estimate it costs Tesla around $250,000 to build just one single multi-stall fast-charging station. One station, $250,000. Just think about the scale of the challenge here. The average American lives just 4 minutes away from a gas station, right? But they live 31 minutes away from a Tesla supercharger. To match the sheer convenience of gas stations across the US, Tesla would need to build over 31,000 more stations, which would cost roughly $7.8 billion. So it's a classic chicken and egg problem. You absolutely need the infrastructure to sell the cars, but you really can't afford to build out a $250,000 piece of infrastructure everywhere until you've already sold millions of cars.
Because these ultra-fast 250 kilowatt chargers are so expensive and, frankly, still pretty rare, EV drivers actually use a really fascinating physics quirk to sort of hack their road trips. As it turns out, batteries charge significantly slower the more full they get. The first 20% of a battery fills up way faster than the last 20%. So if you're out on a road trip, you hit a speed limit that isn't actually based on the charger's power, but on how much electricity your nearly full battery can safely accept. Because of this, it is actually much faster to charge from 0 to 50%, drive until you're completely empty, and then stop to charge from 0 to 50% again, rather than just sitting around waiting to do one really slow charge all the way up to 100%. Doing 2 quick half charges gets you back on the road incredibly fast. It is a brilliant workaround, honestly, but it highlights exactly why we desperately need more chargers everywhere.
Which leads us perfectly into the next major hurdle, the modern format war.
See, just building more chargers doesn't magically solve the problem on its own because the infrastructure we are currently building is incredibly chaotic. We are basically right in the middle of a deeply frustrating modern format war. If we look back at the 1880s, Thomas Edison pushed his DC power system, while George Westinghouse aggressively battled him with the AC power system. That historic format war actually heavily delayed the widespread adoption of electric power in homes because the two standards were entirely incompatible. And today, different stakeholders in the EV market are doing the exact same thing all over again. While Europe wisely stepped in and mandated a unified charging standard, the CTS plug, back in 2018, the United States remains deeply, stubbornly divided by completely incompatible charging cables and proprietary stations.
You can actually see the sheer absurdity of the U.S. market right now in places like the small city of Salina, Kansas, which sits right off Interstate 70. In this one relatively small refueling town, you will find 4 completely different, fundamentally incompatible plug types. You've got the Tesla proprietary plug, CCS, Sudamo, and J1772. If you're driving a Chevy Volt EV, you literally cannot use the Tesla stations or the Sudamo chargers because there simply aren't adapters for your car. This completely fragmented approach forces different companies to build massive, extremely expensive, entirely redundant networks right next to each other. It is incredibly inefficient, and it's holding the entire industry back.
So let's talk about the infrastructure solution. How do we actually fix this?
How do we fix this hurdle so electric vehicles can finally cross that mass market tipping point we talked about? Well, a direct comparison between the United States and Europe shows us exactly how coordinated policy completely changes the landscape globally. Look at the metrics. The land mass is very similar. The total number of electric cars overall is very similar. But Europe has double the number of DC fast charging stations that the US does. Why? Because the European Union stepped in and simply mandated the CCS plug standard bylaw. That one simple directive forced everyone, yes, even Tesla, to use the exact same plug. Because Europe coordinated the standard and actively supported the infrastructure, pretty much any car can use pretty much any fast charger. In the US, though, the fragmented, unregulated approach has quite literally left consumers stranded. Take the massive dead zone out in the American West as a perfect example of this. If you wanted to drive a base model EV from Dallas to Denver, you would hit a massive 226-mile stretch of road between Amarillo, Texas and Trinidad, Colorado with absolutely zero fast chargers. Factoring in the elevation gain on that route, many base model cars literally cannot make this gap. And the absolutely crucial takeaway here is this. Mass market consumers simply will not buy a vehicle if they know it can't reliably travel across the country. They are not going to spend 36 grand to buy a car that traps them in their own state.
And this leads us to a massive, fundamental misdirection in how this entire global transition is being handled. As the research aptly points out, governments are putting the cart before the horse.
Right now, governments all over the world, including the US federal government, offer hefty tax credits to incentivize you, the individual consumer, to buy the car, but they are entirely neglecting to actually build or unify the essential charging infrastructure required to run them. Look, individual car companies are doing a fantastic job making the cars cheaper and extending the range. The vehicles are ready, but individual companies simply cannot build an entire national infrastructure on their own.
Which brings us to our final thought for today's explainer. Governments regulate and run our roads, our bridges, our electric grids, our airports, and our fuel supply networks, all because infrastructure is an absolutely essential public good. So I want to leave you with this provocative question to think about. Why are we pouring billions of dollars into incentivizing the vehicles themselves, but completely ignoring the charging infrastructure actually required to power them? The electric vehicle revolution isn't waiting on a better car anymore. It's waiting on a better plug. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the systems around you, and as always, keep learning.